In this video, we discuss Samuel Richardson and a few of his novels, including Pamela. Samuel Richardson started as a printer and bloomed into a novelist. And he is regarded as the first British novelist, combining fact and fiction. He was a voracious reader during his childhood. His father was a joiner, a carpenter who joined the different cabin parts. While at school, Richardson was nicknamed Serious and Grave Richardson. He didn't engage in the boyish plays. He used to tell his friends the stories that he had read from the books. And as a youth, he wrote prefaces and dedications to others, and assisted his relatives and servants in writing love letters. And this experience helped him to grow into an epistolary novelist. Among his friend circles, there were many ladies, and this gave him an insight into the working of female minds. He used to call the blue-stocking ladies as little spitfires. In his later life, he owned many houses and a printing press in London. And his entry into novel writing happened with the novel Pamela. And he produced 3 novels, Pamela in 2 parts, with Clarissa and the history of Charles Grandison. And these 3 novels were written in the epistolary format. Pamela produced in 2 volumes in 1740 and in 1742. Clarissa was produced in 1747, and the history of Charles Grandison was produced in 1754. The first novel produced by Richardson was Pamela. Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, was produced in the year 1740. In a series of familiar letters from a beautiful young damsel to her parents. Story based on a true story heard by him, and epistolary technique is introduced in the novel, and there is focus on morality, virtue, and chastity. Richardson maintained the view that a demoralized man can become a better husband if he wishes for a change. But in the case of a lady, if she loses her virginity, it is lost forever. And the novel Pamela, or Virtue Rewarded, tells the story of a beautiful young lady defending her chastity even under great pressures. Pamela is introduced in the novel as a young girl of 15 years, working as a maidservant for Lady B in Bedfordshire. After the death of Lady B, her son, Squire B, tries to seduce her, but she resists all his advances. The first housekeeper, Mrs. Jarvis, was very gentle and delicate. She defended Pamela. But when Pamela was asked to work under the next housekeeper, Mrs. Jukis, she was very cruel, and Pamela used to consider her as Jezebel. And while staying at the house of Mr. B, he tried to molest her under several pretexts. On a day, he gets into the bed of Pamela, disguised as a housemaid named Nan. But Pamela understands the disguise and escapes from there. Squire B tries to adopt another technique. He wants Pamela marry the chaplain of the house, Mr. Williams, so that he can make Pamela his mistress. But Pamela defends it and writes letters to her parents, and the letters are secretly collected by Squire B. Finally, Pamela leaves the house of Square B and goes home. And when Square B reads the letters written by Pamela, he understands the virtuous nature of Pamela and his attitude becomes changed. And he writes a letter to Pamela asking her to return with a promise of marriage. And Pamela willingly returns to the house of Mr. B. But Mr. B's sister, Mrs. Davids, tries to dissuade Pamela, tries to discourage Pamela, even tries to quarrel with her. But Squire B offers to marry her, and they get married and they lead a happy and peaceful life. And this is the content of Pamela Part I. Samuel Richardson was forced to add Part II of Pamela, and it was added in 1742, and it is also written in the epistolary format. It is written to counteract the detractors. Henry Fielding, by the time, had written 2 novels imitating Pamela. One was Shamila in 1741, and the other was Joseph Andrews in 1742. And Eliza Haywood also wrote Anti-Pamela, or Feigned Innocence, detected in 1741. Samuel Richardson was forced to answer to the detractors. And in the Part II of Pamela, we come to find that the marriage between Pamela and Squire B reaches to a point of breaking due to the Squire's attempt to fall in love with a widowed countess. The Squire tries to fall in love with a widowed countess, and it becomes known to Pamela, and Pamela begins to write letters to the Squire telling him of his detraction and speaking of wisdom. And finally she succeeds in bringing back the Squire to a familial life. And in 1748, Samuel Richardson produced the Clarissa, or the History of a Young Lady. It's also written in the epistolary format. And this novel has been regarded as the longest novel in English. Clarissa, or the History of a Young Lady, which was produced in 1748, is regarded as the longest novel in English. And it tells the story of the tragedy of the heroine named Clarissa Harlowe, who tried to maintain her chastity. And she becomes seduced by Robert Lovelace, who pretentiously tried to love her. Clarissa Harlowe's brother, James, wanted her to marry Roger Solmes, but she found Roger Solmes physically disgusting. And therefore, when Mr. Lovelace proposed to marry her, she tried to elope with Mr. Lovelace. Circumstances forced her to elope with Mr. Lovelace. And Mr. Lovelace even forced her to stay in brothels. But Clarissa Harlowe defends herself from seduction. But under pressure of drugs, she was raped by Lovelace. In the brothel of one Mrs. Sinclair, under pressure of drugs, Clarissa Harlowe was seduced by Richard Lovelace. Still, she refused to marry him and tried to free herself from him and defended seduction. She defended marriage with Robert Lovelace. Robert Lovelace even tried to propose to marry her, but she refused marriage with him. But a serious illness took away her life, and she has been regarded as a martyr of virtue. And the last novel of Samuel Richardson is entitled The History of Charles Grandison. It was produced in 1753, and it was written in response to Fielding's novel Tom Jones. Tom Jones was produced in 1749 by Henry Fielding, and it is a picaresque novel telling the story of a picaro, and Tom Jones has been presented in the novel as a sexual pervert. In fact, to defend the story of Tom Jones, and Samuel Richardson produced the novel, The History of Charles Grandison. There is also another reason. The female readers of Samuel Richardson wanted him to produce a male virtuous character. Because in all the novels of Samuel Richardson, he produced the male characters as non-virtuous, as sexual perverts. In the novel Pamela, we come to find Squire B even trying to fall in love with a widowed countess after marrying Pamela. And in the beginning of the novel, we come to find him trying to seduce Pamela. And in the next novel, Clarissa, we come to find Robert Lovelace trying to seduce Clarissa Harlowe, and finally succeeding in seducing her. And in the novels of Samuel Richardson, generally we come to find the men are not virtuous. Therefore, the female readers of Samuel Richardson wanted him to produce a virtuous male character in a novel. And Samuel Richardson is forced to write The History of Charles Grandison. There is also another reason. He wanted to write a novel in response to Fielding's Tom Jones. He regarded Tom Jones as an excreta, and he wanted to answer the subject of Tom Jones. He wanted to produce a virtuous male character, so against the sexual pervert presented by Henry Fielding. And when we go into the novel, The History of Charles Grandison, we find that the heroine there is a young lady named Harriet Byron. And there has been a sexual pervert named Sir Hargrave Pollexfen trying to seduce her. Sir Hargrave Pollexfen tries to seduce the young lady Harriet Byron, but she defended seduction. But Harriet Byron was kidnapped by Sir Hargrave Pollexfen, and he took her away to his lodging and tried to molest her. And as she was about to be molested, the young Grandison broke the house, defeated Sir Hargrave Pollexfen, and saved Harriet Byron. But there was no possibility for Harriet Byron to be married by Charles Grandison, because Charles Grandison was already in love with an Italian lady named Signorina Clementina Porretta. Signorina Clementina Porretta. But the lady wanted Charles Grandison to become a Catholic. That he could not become a Catholic. Therefore, he abandoned his lover and married Harriet Byron. And the novel Pamela has been prescribed by the PSC for the assistant professor exam, and you may try to read the details given to you. Thank you.